Hey there, I'm Mark from Spectrum Pulse, and today we have from Bon Iver, Sable fABLE. The odd thing with Bon Iver is that I don't so much feel behind the curve, but ricocheting off their career at odd angles. I got to Justin Vernon's back catalog very late, just before reviewing 2016's 22 A Million, where nearly a decade later, I hear more of the electronic appeal and certainly hear the influence across indie folk and even pop a decade later, but it's never fully clicked for me, where 2019's I had better moments but still struck into that uncanny valley territory, and I have thematic issues, but it's hard not to feel like the bigger story occurred a year later with his contributions to Taylor Swift's Folklore and Evermore. Justin Vernon has always been closer to the mainstream than many realize, thanks to how often he's been sampled or contribute to hip-hop production, especially Kanye West in the 2010s. But Taylor Swift gave him a lot more of the spotlight, and suddenly the gentle, spacious, slightly ramshackle and auto-tune accented indie folk that he was tracing was spreading all across mainstream pop. Between that and finding a lot of similar acts where I became a little more comfortable with his stylism and especially Vernon's falsetto, I was a bit more confident I might like what we could get this time around. I'd rather be honest about a circuitous journey than fake saying, I've always liked him, what can I tell you? And when I heard that this album was leaning back towards the poppier side of folk, bucketing 2024's Sable EP onto this project, I had some hope. And you know what? That hope feels warranted to me, because this feels like the strongest record from Justin Vernon since Bon Iver, albeit one where I am very conscious and might be playing to some of my own biases. For one, it's easily Vernon's most organic feeling album in years. Warm, supple guitars, touches of fiddle, plentiful pedal steel, where I started wondering if he was going into country. And most importantly, while he goes into his awkward, squeaking falsetto on occasion, he spends a lot more time in his weathered mid-register, and it's a really good fit for him, even if I can't quite escape thinking it's not far removed from Chris Martin. But while the EP Sable leans a little more on spare folk, with the exception of a sax solo that wallops through award season, the fABLE side is closer to indie pop, or even some throwback R&B in the progressions and the backing vocals, and that's not a bad fit for him either. Vernon's never had the strongest voice, but he's better mastered, and the peculiar shaggy energy fits surprisingly well on some lovelorn songs, like the bedroom jam Walk Home that could have been great without that squawking, pitched up ad-lib, or the slick, watery Fleetwood Mac-esque Rollicka From with guitar work from MKG and the vocal arrangement punched up by Jacob Collier. Although, sometimes it does feel a little oversold, like on the bubbling Everything is Peaceful Love, which, gotta be honest, never quite felt as buoyant as it's trying to be. Honestly, I think it might be the worst song in the whole thing. And the duets are a little spotty too. Not the best contrast with Casey Hill on Short Story, but by the time we get the duets with Jen Wasner on Walk Home and the lumbering and blaring Day One, and especially Danielle Haim on I'll Be There and the fractured dreaminess If Only I Could Wait, the chemistry actually shines through pretty effectively. Although if I do have a major critique of some of the R&B elements in the swerve, beyond some of the watery melodies feeling a shade more pop-friendly, dare I even say conventional, it's how the grooves often feel increasingly blocky, relying on leaden beats instead of building any sort of rollick or tempo, and that calls back to issues I had with 22 A Million. But the awkwardness might actually be part of the point this time, which takes us to a very welcome thematic growth in this direction, because much of Sable was first crafted around the pandemic after the cancellation of the II tour, which forced Justin Vernon to really take stock of himself, not just of the people he might have hurt in his wake, but also his own culpability in his failed relationships, or the deep fear to actually change and grow in the hard way. And it allowed him to not just find joy and actually trying to let go and embrace change, but also healthier romance where he's willing to give so much more, perhaps a little too much, when the partner just can't match that intensity, or is going through other things he can't quite change or understand, and thus that forces him to slow down, take a breath, be willing to match someone else's pace. Compared to how often Justin Vernon used to relentlessly dodge responsibility in order to amplify that rawness, this feels a little more thoughtful and reflective, and dare I even say mature. And while there's still rough edges in the emotionality where he's trying to temper himself, that deepens the emotional complexity, and he doesn't quite feel as self-satisfied about it. Of course, part of that is because Sundays had an extremely similar thematic arc on Wiyaka back in 2019, but But I'm gonna be honest, they were borrowing from Bon Iver's template. I have no expectation Vernon heard that album. I think it's a net positive all around. In short, look, I don't think I'll ever be the biggest Bon Iver fan, from some of the falsetto that I still don't quite love, to the blockier grooves, to how Justin Vernon's style of writing feels impressionistic but barely at the service of more eclectic lyricism. And I also get why some fans might be reticent with the project. The pop elements are more obvious than ever. It's easily his most accessible project, and if you think it slips a little too far into mushy, easy listening, I might understand. But I also can't help but think it's really good. The most organic he sounded in years, with tighter hooks and a sharper thematic arc where I'll actually buck trends for myself and say I appreciate the EP getting tacked on to open up the project. It really works in setting the stage. Might be an easier sell for someone who is not a diehard Bon Iver fan than ever before, but I still think it's worth your time and proper attention. It's really good, frequently close to great. Give it a shot. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you want to see more, please be sure to like, share, drop comments, subscribe. I'll admit, being a little bit more positive on this one, it's a nice touch. I certainly wasn't expecting it, but hey, if y'all have comments down there below, especially for the die-hard, like, Bon Iver fans, I'd be curious to hear from you, especially given some of the swerves on this album are different than previous projects. Beyond that though, anything else I might be able to do, I'm all ears. And then from there, if you guys want to help support the channel, get albums onto my schedule, yell at me on my Discord, I point to YouTube memberships and Patreon. Once again, don't feel obligated. Tough times out there, I understand, but the option's available. Till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.